Welcome to Earthsayers podcast series, a program that amplifies the voices of people who care about life on Earth. This weekly series shares the voices of transformational leaders, offering conversations to deepen learning and spark action in today's challenging times. These discussions are framed by the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, from ending poverty to protecting the planet. Leaders in film, sustainability advocacy, and change agents discuss their work and the personal challenges they have met and overcome during their careers. Let's get started and enjoy today's podcast.
Hi, welcome to Earthsayer Podcast. I'm Shannon Lovgren, and today I am so honored to be speaking with Judith Enck, president of Beyond Plastics and a nationally recognized leader in environmental policy and advocacy, a former EPA regional administrator, and longtime champion for sustainability. Judith has dedicated her career to reducing plastic pollution and driving bold systemic change. She is also the author of a new book, The Problem with Plastic: How We Can Save Ourselves and Our Planet Before It's Too Late. And it is a powerful call to action that combines science, policy, and community voices to chart a path forward. So in our conversation today, we'll explore her vision for leadership and sustainability, the challenges and opportunities tackling the plastics crisis, and the role each of us can play in building a healthier, more resilient future. So with that, I welcome you, Judith. Thank you for being part of the Earthsayer podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, great. Well, I kind of want to start out with your background. So what led you to becoming a environmentalist, plastics advocate? Tell me your origin story. Take it from the bottom.
Well, I grew up in the Catskill Mountains and surrounded by beauty, and didn't really hear the word environmentalism. It was a conservative area, but I loved the outdoors. Went off to college. And while I was at college, I became very active on environmental issues. Left college with my degree and no job, but I really wanted to continue work on adopting the New York State bottle bill. This is the returnable container law. 10 states in the country have it. I started working on it when I was a college student. It didn't pass in the New York State legislature. And I just wanted to keep going. Could not find a job doing this. And so I wiggled my way into an environmental group in Albany. They were looking for an office manager. And I'm a very good typist. And so I cut a deal with them and I said, I will do all the office manager stuff, but you need to let me lobby during the week in the legislature when they are in session. And I remember that interview, and they were kind of skeptical and said, well, who's gonna answer the phone if you're over in the legislature? And this will age me. I said, no worries. There's this new product called an answering machine. I'll turn that on while I'm racing over to the state capitol to lobby on the bill. And so I give environmental advocates credit. That is the name of the group in Albany. They went along with this kind of unconventional office manager position where I did all the important office manager stuff, but I mostly organized and lobbied in the legislature, and voila, we passed the bill into law that year. So that's how I cut my teeth, and also got the lesson that when an issue really grabs you, just go for it. Find a way to construct your life so you can work on the issues that you care the most deeply about.
Yeah, can you say that again? I think that is really important for people who are listening and trying to figure out what they want to do with their life and career and how they can make a difference. Can you just say what you just said, just so that we're emphasizing that? Because I think it's really important.
Sure. I think it starts with you identifying what you want to work on, what is your passion, and then find a way to do it. We're not always fortunate to find a staff position. So try to wiggle your way into a group where you can become invaluable, or you can really do it as a volunteer if you can't find a staffed position. The vast majority of the environmental advocacy that happens in the United States is done by volunteers. These are people who, you know, part with their very precious limited time, nights and weekends, and they are helping to build a movement toward a cleaner and healthier world for all of us. It's really selfless work when you do it as a volunteer in your corner of the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very good distinction of you don't have to make this your job. You can also volunteer. Don't wait to do the good things that you want to do until it's your employment. Do it now. I
Right.
think,
And on climate change and on plastic pollution, there's no time. You know, we've got to get points on the board this year. With greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere today, they last for decades. So even if we had a substantial shift in the federal government, um, the urgency of reducing greenhouse gases is very real. And you know, we can't wait for the political winds to turn. You know, the longer we wait, the harder it is to solve the climate crisis, to solve the growing problem of plastic pollution, and getting basic health protections for our families.
yeah. Well, we're going to dive into that in a minute, but tell me again, why should I listen to you, Judith? What is your background? Why should I care what you have to say about plastics?
Well, you don't have to, but I've been working on waste issues for decades. My whole career has been spent both inside government and outside government. I always try to figure out where can I have the greatest impact. So I did spend 8 years in the New York Attorney General's office. I'm not a lawyer, but I assisted lawyers and scientists in figuring out what cases to bring on behalf of the people of the state of New York. I spent some time as Deputy Secretary for the Environment in the New York Governor's Office, and then was really honored and privileged to be appointed EPA Regional Administrator during the President Obama's administration. And so those were like 3 steps inside government. But then I decided I wanted to work on plastics. And I know from my experience that government agencies are not often the tip of the spear on issues. I'm a big believer in when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And even though plastics has been a problem for decades, it really hasn't emerged until recently as a top of mind issue and something that we can do something about collectively. So, you know, the good thing about when you're a political appointee in a federal agency is you have a long time to think about what you want to do next. And it's not like I was getting a lot of job offers from ExxonMobil or Dow Chemical. But I had some interesting offers. But, you know, who wants a big salary and weekends off? That is overrated. So I just had this idea in my head that I wanted to work on plastics full time because of, we'll get into the many different elements of this issue. So I made the rounds. I visited some national environmental groups, some foundations. What are you doing on plastics? You know, what do you think about these strategies? And every conversation ended the same. It was, this is a really important issue, Judith. You should work on it. We're not working on it. And I should have read something into that because everyone said the same thing. And I think the reason why the big green groups have not been doing more on plastics is because they were so busy with climate change issues. And then second, when you work on plastics, you're taking on the fossil fuel industry, the plastics industry, the chemical industry, and big consumer brand companies. Who in their right mind would set out to do that, work on an issue where you have all of that industry opposition? So not surprisingly, not a lot of people were interested in this work. And while I didn't necessarily want to set up a new organization, that's what I did. I set up Beyond Plastics. We're based at Bennington College in Vermont, where I teach. And we have grown from one staff person 5 years ago to 17. And we're sustainably growing and working to be more effective on this issue.
when you say that you're 17 people, that seems like a very small group of people with this ambition to have a huge impact to build a world beyond plastic. So we'll dive more into that later as how a small group of committed individuals can change the world. But when I'm thinking of your long career and you're developing this beyond plastics and working in the plastic, what what made you feel, or what was your leadership style, and your what are your thoughts on developing that leadership passion, that leadership role, and then that ability to lead others towards this goal of reducing plastic?
Well, I think we all can be leaders in the movement to reduce plastic pollution. The first thing is to become very well informed, which a couple of years ago was hard, and that's one reason we wrote the book, The Problem with Plastic, to get information into people's hands. I think you basically need just a couple elements. You need to be well informed. Um, you need to be tireless because there are no quick wins.
Mm.
And third, you need to have just a little bit of fun doing this work because the facts are a little grim and overwhelming. And so that's why we encourage people to work in groups, not alone. It's a great way to get to know your neighbors. Also, waste issues are typically handled by local governments, not the federal government. So you can go down to City Hall or county legislature and talk at public meetings and come up with ideas on how your own community can reduce plastics. And, it's just kind of funny. There's people who gravitate toward environmental issues, but there's also a gender gap on this issue. I teach a class online through Bennington College on plastic pollution. I teach it every semester. It's just 7 weeks. And consistently, over 95% of the people in my class are women. And our local advocacy work is usually women led. And you look at the broader environmental movement, and I've kind of paid attention to this over the years. Eh, You know, land conservation seems to be male dominated, air pollution, so. Waste issues are really tackled by women. I don't know entirely why that is, but that is who shows up. And so it's also an opportunity to nurture and encourage women's leadership in politics, women's leadership in their community. And there's this great saying from Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, an old peace group out of Philadelphia. They said, listen to women for a change. And I think on the plastics issue, that is true.
Oh, that's very interesting, and that's an unsuspected statistic that there's so many more women interested in waste. Um, when when you talk about the plastic crisis, what do you think is the biggest the biggest element of that crisis? The
Well, there are,
overlooked area.
yeah, there are a number. One is the health and plastics issue. A couple of years ago, it was really hard to find peer-reviewed scientific papers on health and plastics. Now it's about, once a month, there's a new peer-reviewed paper identifying microplastics, which is 5 millimeters or less, so little tiny pieces of plastic. Um, Scientists have found microplastics in our brains. It's crossed the blood-brain barrier. There was a New England Journal of Medicine article identifying microplastics in heart arteries and found that if you've got microplastics in your heart arteries, you have an increased risk of stroke, heart attack, and premature death. Microplastics have been found in our lungs, in our kidneys, in our blood, in the human placenta. in breast milk, in testicles, and it's virtually anywhere you look in the body. And the way we get microplastics in the body is we breathe it in or we swallow little pieces of plastic. The other giant health issue, which does not get enough attention, is people living close to plastic manufacturing facilities. I'm particularly focused on Cancer Alley in Louisiana. Believe it or not, that is a common name. It's a stretch of the Mississippi River between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where plastics are manufactured. And there's an incredible grassroots movement, often led by women, who are taking on the petrochemical industry in a big way. That's also happening in Texas and parts of Appalachia. And their number one concern is the health impacts of breathing in the air pollution, dealing with the water pollution from these plastic manufacturing facilities. So health is a big issue, both during the production of plastic and in our daily lives. Climate change is a big part of the plastic issue because plastics traditionally were made from chemicals and oil. They're now made by 16,000 different chemicals and ethane, which is a waste product of hydrofracking for gas. Plastics is an oceans issue. Large amounts of plastic get littered and they get into streams and rivers. They all flow to the ocean. And we are basically turning our ocean into a giant unregulated landfill, which is an enormous concern. And in fact, it was what first drew me to the issue was the massive amount of plastic going into the ocean, affecting marine life, seabirds, and all of us. So this is multifaceted, and the really interesting thing is that there are alternatives to plastics. We can dramatically reduce the use of plastics, and we don't need a new space age breakthrough. I mean, I love the mycelium products made from mushroom and agricultural waste, but we can also rely on paper, cardboard, metal, glass. They can all be made from recycled material and are recyclable. But certainly the strategy that is the best in terms of alternatives to plastic is just reducing waste. We've all had the experience of you order something online and it comes in layer after layer of packaging. And that's because you and I pay to get rid of all of that, not the companies that are sending us this material. So in New York State, for instance, Beyond Plastics and others are working really hard to pass a bill called the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, which would shift the responsibility to the producers for getting rid of all of this single-use packaging. So they have an economic incentive to reduce packaging. That is a really crucial policy reform that we need to get state legislatures to adopt all over the country.
Yeah. Well, that brings up another topic of when we think of, you mentioned recycling, what is the best thing that we can do to help reduce plastics? Is it recycling? Is it talking to our policy, our politicians? Is it to write a letter to our companies? Like what should we do?
Well,
what should we do? You have the expertise, so we want to know.
So recycling is not the solution on plastic. I mean, keep recycling your paper, metal, glass, compost your yard waste and food waste. But over 90% of plastics never get recycled. So even putting it in your recycling bin at home or at work doesn't mean it gets recycled. Only number 1 and number 2 plastic actually get recycled. So they're little tiny numbers on the bottom. So it's hard plastic like a detergent container, or a milk jug. All the other plastics, the film plastic, most that's used in packaging, there are no markets to recycle that. And people are surprised to learn this because the plastics industry has spent millions of dollars deceiving the public about the recyclability of plastics. In fact, California Attorney General Rob Bonta filed a lawsuit against ExxonMobil for deceiving the public about plastics recycling and also the plastics industry's latest false solution, which is called chemical recycling. So, you know, recycling is not going to solve the problem. The most important thing, I think, is taking political action, and I mean that in a nonpartisan way. So, talking to your elected officials, ask them what they're doing to reduce plastics, showing up at city council meetings. Local government officials are really interested in reducing waste because it costs too much money for them to handle all of it because you have to collect it. If it's recycling, you have to find an end market. If it's not recyclable, you have to pay a lot of money to dump it at a landfill or an incinerator. So local governments should be your partners in reducing plastic waste and all waste. And then you mentioned letters to the editor. That is a really effective way to get information out, posting on social media, getting local governments to pass resolutions, supporting state laws. There's a list of things that you can do, and we have model local laws and state laws on the Beyond Plastics website. We have, a really good fact sheet on how to write an effective letter to the editor. Quick tip, short is better than long, and you want to pivot off of a recent event in the news. I think the last letter I had published in the New York Times was 4 sentences. So go with a short letter to the editor if you want to get it published.
Okay. And then what about the role of the corporations? They're the big polluters. They're the ones who are making this plastic. How do we reach them? Like, what can we do for?
Yeah, quite honestly, they typically don't listen to consumer concern on plastics because plastics is so cheap for them, not cheap for the rest of us. So we have to change the law, like the one being considered in New York and other states, because voluntary initiatives just don't have much of an impact. I think, it doesn't hurt to contact them and write them letters to the editor. We have a model letter on our website that you can use to write to the manager of your supermarket. But quite honestly, we don't see a lot of change coming from companies on their own. We need to adopt new laws at the local, state, at some point federal level to change things. Think about the gigantic issue of air pollution from cars. We have fuel efficiency standards for cars now because of the Federal Clean Air Act. Companies on their own didn't decide to make their cars more fuel efficient. And we all benefit from that because you're paying less at the pump, or if you have an electric car, you're not at the pump at all. The electric car industry, more fuel efficiency cars, more energy efficient appliances benefits all of us because who wants to waste money on your utility bill? That all happened because of laws, not because of industry innovation.
Okay, that's a good point, that politics matter and laws matter. So we should be focusing on that. When I was reading your book, you talk a lot about how plastics affect people differently in different communities differently. So I just thought you wrote a really beautiful dedication. So I'm going to read it here.
Thank you.
You said, this is the dedication. By design, low-income people and communities of color bear the burden of plastics. The destructive web of plastics gathers in their neighborhoods, rivers, air, and bodies. We dedicate this book to those living in the shadow of plastics facilities in Louisiana, Texas, Appalachia, and elsewhere, in the sincere belief that they should live in a world beyond plastics, and that such a world is within our reach. So That's a beautiful dedication to these people who are most affected by plastics. But thinking with a sustainability and a global perspective, tell me more about the global impact of plastics and how that affects communities, not just locally, but globally.
Well, this is a global problem, and that's why the United Nations attempted to do a UN treaty on plastics, which unfortunately has not been ratified, even though there have been a series of really important meetings. And it wasn't ratified because of political opposition from the United States, from Saudi Arabia, from Russia, and various petrostates. So at the UN level, there are about 180 companies that are part of 180 countries rather, that are part of something called the High Ambition Coalition. So this is a large number of countries that want to do something, but they were blocked from being able to reach consensus at the UN on a plastics treaty. Plastic production is on the rise all over the world, although most plastic waste in the world is created by the United States. And there's two other issues that are not really appreciated. One is the export of plastic waste to other countries. So when you put even your number one and number two plastics into your recycling bin, there is a chance that that is being exported to the Philippines, to Malaysia, to Africa now, and creating environmental and health problems in those countries. And this is really beautifully explained in an award-winning film called The Story of Plastic, which I highly recommend, published by the nonprofit group The Story of Stuff. So you can just go to thestoryofstuff.org and figure out how to watch that movie. So the export of plastic is important. The other issue that is kind of a sleeper issue, and I regret we didn't spend more time on this in the book, is little tiny pieces of plastic are manufactured. They're called nurdles. It's kind of a cute, funny name, but there's nothing cute or funny about these little nurdles. And they are transported all over the world. And often there's a train derailment and they get into rivers. Ocean-going vessels lose massive amounts of these nurdles. And they're really tiny and they build up in the marine environment. And that is affecting our ecology worldwide, and hardly anyone knows about this. Nurdles are a good topic for another book if anyone is interested in doing a deeper dive on plastics.
Yeah. Nurdles does sound kind of adorable. And
Yeah, I should call them pre-production plastics. That's what they really are.
yeah. Hmm. So when we're talking about sustainability and inspiring this next generation who is inheriting all the challenges and that we have created, what 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 hope can we give the next generation? What call to action can we give them to help reconcile and build the future without plastic?
Well, the nice thing about the plastics issue is you can jump right in locally. So if you're on a college campus, you can start working to get your campus to use less plastic. There are some innovative companies that are working with college campuses to promote reusable stainless steel packaging in cafeterias, for instance. You can ask your college to offer courses on plastic pollution within their environmental studies department. At Bennington, we have a wonderful center. At Bennington College, where I teach, we have the Center for the Advancement of Public Action. That's where I live and teach a class on Zoom. It's open to everyone, by the way. Most of my students are auditors from around the country who take the class. And then you do larger than local. You work on your campus and then you go to your town board or city council, and then you go to your county. um, people will be surprised at how many people are really interested in this issue, but they don't know what to do. So the first thing is to go to the Beyond Plastics website, beyondplastics.org. We have lots of details on what to do. And don't do it alone. Find a friend, find a group of friends, find people that you've never met before. And maybe you don't agree with them on everything, but all of us can agree that we don't want plastic pollution in our communities. There's bipartisan support for these policies. So my advice to young people is just get in the arena. It's great that you have a refillable water bottle that you use. It's great that you say no to plastic bags, but if we're going to affect change, we have to get into the policy arena.
Um, that's very good advice. And I think one that we think, oh, I'm doing my job because I'm recycling my things. I decline the straw at the Starbucks when I go through it.
Mhm.
But if we want to make real change, then we need to get involved politically. Is that what I hear you're
Yeah,
saying?
absolutely. And all those steps in your personal life are smart. Keep doing it. It's also protecting your health, because when you're sucking on a straw, you don't want to be consuming microplastics. Um, but personal lifestyle changes are not enough to drive the level of change that we need to see on the plastics issue. So jump in. You can do it in a partisan or a nonpartisan way. We are nonpartisan, but you can also, support candidates running for local office who pledge to do something about the plastics problem and the climate change problem. But think of how much time people spend scrolling on their phone. Give us half of that time for activism. I'm kind of alarmed whenever I see these studies of the average amount of time people spend scrolling, and I scroll, I admit. Um, but I think I read people are spending 3 to 4 hours a day just looking at social media, and maybe they're learning things and maybe that's their sense of community, but spend 1 hour a day working on environmental activism, and you'll feel better. You'll spend time with people. You'll feel like you're making a difference. Um, and I'm not saying abandon your phone. Try it if you can, but just give a little bit more time to civic democracy.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that liking a post on some plastic information is not the same as spending time working on the issue. And you make a really good point. If I can spend 3 hours a day on social media, if I spend an hour a week, an hour even a month on something that can actually move the needle, that's time well spent. And you also said it'll make you feel better.
Mhm.
And there's nothing that makes you feel better than taking action towards something that you care about.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And whatever issue that is. I mean, of course I want everyone working on plastics, but there's no shortage of issues that need your political attention these days. Immigrant rights, education, women's rights. I mean, the list goes on and on. I have to admit that when I speak to groups, when I'm asking for financial support for Beyond Plastics, I often say we should not be your top choice for financial donations, because what's going on other issues is actually more urgent. But put us in your top three when you're thinking about donations to nonprofits, because we have to keep there's so much in the news every day that worries us, and for me depresses me, but we also have to have the long picture, um, and build sustainable organizations that are here for the long term to keep working on these issues no matter who's in office.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you a question about plastics are everywhere. We use it for everything. and we use it in building materials. In your book, you talk about how it's a major building material. What what's the alternative? What is the I'm not going to use plastic solution?
So it's different for every application. So building materials, for instance, I would avoid carpet. It has a lot of plastic and PFAS chemicals in it. And if you can, wood flooring. I would avoid polyester clothing as much as you can because when you wash it, you're going to be releasing a lot of microplastics, including if you put it in the dryer. But even if you do buy polyester, hang it out to dry rather than throwing it in the dryer every single time if your local climate allows for that. Plastic packaging is easier. Look for first, reusable packaging. But if you can't do that, there's paper, cardboard, metal, glass. Now, what's happened though is a lot of companies have taken choice away from us. It's really hard to find yogurt in anything except plastic. No one voted for more plastic yogurt containers. In fact, I hear from yogurt eaters all the time. People want glass as an alternative. And what we need to do is adopt laws to get companies to change because they're not changing on their own.
Yeah. Well, thinking of that, if I were to, the plastic is so light. So if I were to have a plastic container and all of a sudden I get my yogurt in a glass container, when I think of like, well, this glass weighs so much more, and even though it's recyclable, it's caught the shipping of it is going to take more resources in the transport. Am I doing anything good for the environment? What is the balance there in terms of my impact versus am I actually making things better or am I actually making things worse? How do you think about that in terms of why it's still important to get rid of plastic?
Well, you raise a good point. Plastic is lighter, so for transportation, it's less energy. But whenever I have an alternative to plastic, I grab it, including, I go to my local food co-op for glass yogurt and then I save the jars. You're middle-aged when you start falling in love with your jars. So I love the glass yogurt jars and I save them for other things. I don't even recycle them. Or if I'm dropping off some soup to a neighbor who's ill, I will drop it off in one of my treasured yogurt jars and then they get to have that gem. Um, it also depends on what distance it's coming from. So, the rule of thumb is buy as local as you can. So farmers markets, food co-ops tend to have more local products. And even when you factor in the energy of transporting glass, I personally think it's better because I don't want to be nibbling on microplastics in my yogurt. And also, the glass can be made from recycled material. It can be recycled, or more importantly, it can be reused. We will drive ourselves crazy if we try to do a life cycle analysis on everything we buy in the store. So there's this great woman, she's known as the zero waste chef. She says we need millions of people doing zero waste imperfectly than a small amount of people doing it perfectly. So we all just have to do the best we can.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on is that we don't have to be perfect, but we do need to be conscientious about how we use plastic and start to learn about all the ways that plastics affect our lives, our health, our environment, uh, our our future problems that we are going. It's a part of climate change, and I think your book does a very good job of outlining the history, the the bad solution or the fake solutions, the real solutions, the government policy, and then how to start taking action to go forward. And here at Earthstayers, we're focusing on sustainability leaders and their voices. And your voice is clearly a great voice for getting to a world beyond plastic. So thank you so much for providing us this book and the kind of a guideline for how we can get to where we want to go for a more sustainable future. And with that, do you have any final words that you would like to share with those who will be listening on what we can do? Or, yeah.
So my new book, The Problem with Plastic with Adam Mahoney, is coming out December 2nd. And I want to really urge people to use this as a springboard to action. Hold a book party at your local bookstore or in your own home. Share this with elected officials. Get this book in your public library and join forces with your neighbor. Not only is all the information in the book, but there are a whole bunch of footnotes and citations. So when you show up at your city council saying, I want you to ban plastic bags, and the lobbyist from the chemical industry says, oh no, we don't need to ban plastic bags. That's not true that there's that many produced. You just look at the section on that deals with bags and look at the footnotes. So this is a book that is written first to inform, but also to activate. This is a big, big issue that people need to come together on. So this book is a gift to anyone who wants to get active in their community, hold house parties, contact Beyond Plastics. Our website is beyondplastics.org, and we're happy to give you any of the tools you need to promote the book.
Yeah, I will second that. As I read it, I thought exactly those words. This is a guidebook to to making a better choice for my own personal health, but for the community and for taking action. So thank you so much, Judith, for your time and for writing this book. And we wish you all the success in creating a world beyond plastic.
Thanks. It's great to be with you.